Skill-based matchmaking has been a hot topic in the gaming scene lately, to say the least. We've had huge content creators like Tim the Tatman weighing in recently, and the whole thing has really made me reflect on the entire scene. On one hand, with SBMM, you're giving casual players more of a chance to compete, which is probably a good thing, and then on the other hand, the more dedicated players out there feel like they're being gypped a little bit because every single lobby is the sweatiest thing ever. And I get it, at the end of the day, the devs have some tools that show analytics that more people stick around with better retention in games, and overall that somehow makes them more money for the big corporations and yada yada. I understand that the gaming industry is a giant behemoth, and these days games are made for money and the whole thing's unlikely to change. But as a gamer, the whole situation's making me a little bit sad, but not really for myself, more for the younger players out there who have never experienced what a non-SBMM world looks like. You see, I'm a 36-year-old and I've been playing games for the majority of my life at this point. The first FPS game that I really got into was Counter-Strike back in the days of maybe like 1.3, 1.4 era. And when I started out, I was absolutely awful. Like the bottom of the scoreboard, absolute dead last almost every single lobby. My brother and I both got into it at the same time, and I remember we would switch off every few deaths, and it would happen pretty quickly because we were both just terrible at this game. But for some reason, it just hooked us. We were obsessed at getting better and better as slowly as it happened at first. The interesting thing back in those days is you would join these lobbies that had maybe 16 or 32 players, and you could see the whole diversity of the scoreboard skill. While we were down at the very bottom of the barrel, you could see the kind of guys who were in the middle range and even some of the top ones who were just slaying every single game. And back in those days, you used to have more community-based servers where you'd see the same names pop up over and over again. So if you saw one guy who killed you once, it was likely that you're going to get killed by him over and over again for the next month. Every once in a blue moon, you'd even have a pro player join these lobbies, and it was just unbelievable how good they were. I specifically remember one day Rambo, the FPS player who now has a YouTube channel, joined one of our lobbies and was shredding everyone. I think he went something like 80-2 in the Counter-Strike lobby, which was pretty much unbelievable at that time. And I remember just wanting to die as fast as I could every round just so I could die and spectate and watch him to see how good he was. A lot of people who weren't familiar with the CS Pro scene at the time thought he was a cheater. And honestly, it wasn't that hard to believe because he was just snapping on heads like crazy, and it felt like he just couldn't miss a shot and was always one step ahead of whoever he was in a duel with. A lot of fellow gamers in these lobbies back in the day would get frustrated when they died to these really good players, but for me, I looked at it as an opportunity to see how good someone could get, and I used that as inspiration to want to improve myself. I remember spending countless hours in these maps like Aim Map and Aim AK Colt, where you just sit there for hours and hours dueling it out, dying over and over again, but getting slightly better every single day. These are back in the days before aim training even really existed as a concept, and I wish it did exist back then because honestly, it would have been probably a much better gamer today. But back then, the closest thing we had was these deathmatch maps, or even in the pre-match warm-up, you'd spawn next to your teammates and you could practice flicking from one head to another and just pretending that they're enemies. This whole time in these 16 or 32 player lobbies, I would watch my name on the scoreboard slowly start to creep up from the bottom to the bottom middle to the middle to the top middle, and every once in a while I'd even be one of the top players in the game. It was pretty rare, but it was really satisfying when I would pull it off. It was also an interesting time because you could see the exact impact of different upgrades to your setup. The very first mouse that we started on was one of those old Microsoft mouses with the ball inside. A lot of you younger guys out there probably have literally no idea what I'm talking about with these, but back in the day we had these mice with balls in it that would track your X or Y axis, and they'd get full of crap like hair and dust particles, and every once in a while you'd have to open up the ball mouse and take some cotton swabs and clean out the sensors, and it was quite a bit different than the nice mice that we have today. Kids today growing up with these incredible mice that are so accurate and lightweight just have no idea how good gaming peripherals have gotten over the last like 20 years or so. I also remember one specific summer where my brother and I convinced my parents to let us upgrade from our internet at the time, which it wasn't even 56K, I think it was like 36K at the time, which was for the poor people who couldn't even afford 56K modems, and we'd upgrade that to broadband, which was absolutely game changing for your performance. We instantly went from having like 300 ping in every single game all the way down to maybe 20 or 30. You could click people and it would actually die when you clicked them. It was just unbelievable. And this was so cool to me at that time because you could literally see your name rising up on the scoreboard whenever you improved your setup, your skills, or pretty much any combination of these things. It gave you a true measuring stick of your own performance in the lobby relative to all other players who were playing the game. As I got more and more invested, I joined some teams that were in the different leagues at the time like Cal, and we started at the very bottom in Cal Open, but over time we got better and better and we synergized as a team and climbed up to the ranks like Cal IM and Cal M, and we did a bunch of scrims against pro teams, and we definitely got our butts kicked at the time, but it was really cool because you could see that improvement back in the game whenever you joined these public lobbies. After a couple of years of grinding away and getting better and better and better at Counter-Strike, I remember being the top player in almost every single lobby that I would enter, and to the point where people thought I was cheating consistently. And that's really the part that makes me sad about this new SBMM movement. Again, I understand it from an economic standpoint that the companies probably make more money this way, but I feel like the kids growing up today in this SBMM environment never really get the chance to measure themselves against the rest of the population the same way that we used to. It's definitely not nearly as big of a problem in games that have a proper rank system like Counter-Strike or Valorant and so on, but a lot of games these days that are more casual in nature don't seem to have that system, or if they do have some sort of rank system, it's almost an afterthought and not really baked into the game. In these lobbies with heavy SBMM, it's really hard to feel your own improvement sometimes because although you're getting better, the competition's getting better at roughly the same rate, so you can never really tell if you're getting significantly better or worse than the opponents you're playing. And the only way to really check this sometimes is to play with other players who are either much higher ranked in the SBMM ladder than you are or much lower ranked. It's particularly noticeable in games like Call of Duty that have score streaks and incentivize you to get these really long kill streaks because it's much harder to do these days when you're playing against people who are always at your exact same skill level. And honestly, I'm not sure if this is a good or a bad thing for the gaming industry at large, but I'm really curious to hear about your opinions. Do you think that SBMM is a blessing or a curse for the gaming industry? I'd love to hear from you in the comments.